I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on this 70 Challenger RT. If you haven't seen how we got to this point, please go back and watch the last video where we mounted the car to the jig, we unbolted all the parts, and we basically got it to this stage and told a little bit of the history behind the car. On this video, we're gonna do a lot more removal of the external body and the rust on this car. We're gonna strip down everything, the roof, the quarters. I think we're going to expose a lot more rust behind on the inner channels. I have a big list of parts that came with this car, so there's a lot of stuff I already know that we're going to start just ripping apart. There's things on these cars that just aren't worth the time to sit there and patch little pieces when we have all these part manufacturers make these big quality AMD parts to replace major sections of it. So you're going to see this process. We are going to remove a lot. I feel with these cars as old as they are, the only way to really do them right is to get them down to the state we're about to take it in, where we remove all the rusted parts out, we expose the rest of it, we treat it, and I'll show you on this process why I go about doing this and how I go about doing this. Here's a perfect example. Even right here on where the hinges bolt up, both sides of this car, you can see from the factory, there's bare metal exposed after all these years. And luckily it was sandwiched in there so it didn't really get the air it needed to rust, but you could see right around it, it's all rusted. That's the same thing on a lot of this inner structure and parts you don't see on these cars. They weren't made to last these decades upon decades. So really, you know, they rust really bad. So a lot of cars you can buy online and they look like a good deal. They look good on the outside, but the inside's all rusted out. So like I said, I'm gonna show you on this process. When we start cutting it up, you're gonna see the rust on these cars. This roof doesn't look in that bad a shape, but I have a feeling once we cut it up, it's gonna be really rusted underneath. So stay tuned. Let's get to cutting on this car and we'll come back. It's gonna be all in time lapse, so it's gonna be kind of quick, but I'll show you how we do this process and then we'll do a quick final thought on the closing of the video. So here we go. The first step, what I'm going to do with this car, I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to work my way towards the back, and I want to really just get the outer skin off first. So the roof, I've been dying to look at this roof for about a week now. So here it is. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the roof. I'm basically just following around the window channel. I am using a cutoff disc. You'll see most of the time I'm either using an air chisel or a cutoff disc. There's very few times we take out the plasma cutter. In other videos I've seen people recommend, oh, you need a plasma cutter, it's going to go a lot faster. Well, we have a plasma cutter. The deal is with the plasma cutter, I feel you don't have as much control. You obviously don't usually get as clean of a cut, and then you can't see and control the depth you're going. So right here, I'm skimming over this thing, keeping that disc really high to make sure I don't dig through the bottom inner structure. Right now, I was looking for the lead channels, and I forgot that this car had quarter skins applied to it. So really, they just filled this whole thing with Bondo, and there's some fiberglass behind it. You could see this is about 3/4 inch thick, maybe even thicker in some areas on both sides. So really what I'm doing, I'm digging the lead channel where the lead channel would be right out so I can get my cutoff wheel and basically cut the roof line above that lead seam and the quarter line below the lead seam. That allows me to leave the center in there like I'm doing right now, and then I'll come back through with a grinder or an air chisel later and just air chisel it out. Right now, the whole outer structure, we're getting the general big parts off the car. We just want to get them off first, take a look at the inner structure, and then we'll come back and start cleaning up the edges. This process, I feel doing it this way just makes it a whole lot easier. Looking at this thing, you could see there's plenty of rust on it. So now, like I said, that the outer skin channel's off, you could see the rot underneath these drip rails. So what I need to do, I'm removing the drip rails as easy as I can. I mean, at this point, there's not too much behind it. So there's some areas that are ripping off with the drip rails, but we're removing the drip rails because of course they're all rotted away too. So we're going to get new drip rails, and then we're working our way on to the quarter skin, removing that. Really, any exterior sheet metal, I pretty much follow this same process. I really like the cutoff wheel. I like the battery cutoff wheel a lot better because I can even control it even more. It's a little bit slower, but you're at the mercy of battery. So you'll see I kind of rotate between the electric one and the battery operated one. But again, I'm just going around the outside. I'm putting a cut. Now, with the wheel houses, I know we're replacing the wheel houses, so I'm not super worried about that. Also, the bottom of this quarter panel was actually glued on with some kind of panel adhesive, and I was able to just rip that off. You'll see the people that worked on the car before me, not the owners right now, but somewhere down the line, probably the 80s, probably whoever put that filler and these skins on there, they went crazy with the panel adhesive and it really didn't hold. So I've been fighting that. I've been ripping some of it off. You'll see remnants of it scattered out everywhere through this disassembly process. Moving on to the quarter skin removal on this other side, it's literally the same process. The rot up top in the channels was about the same. You could see this area above the wheel houses, the E-bodies always rot out. It seems like every single car, even the best shape, that's a place of rot that I've come to just expect over time. So removing this quarter panel, like I said, same thing. You get a better view where I'm basically just cutting it right with the trunk gutter and everything. Now with this trunk gutter, this is a numbers car, so I didn't see any numbers on it, but this thing might have been under filler or it was replaced years ago with these really cheap skins. You can see they have to actually left a sticker on the inside of the skin still with the patch that are laid over the original quarter. But we're going to go through, I'm going to make sure I get that trunk area gutter, and we're going to go ahead and try to sandblast it just to make sure there's not a hidden number on it that I can put back on the car in its proper location and just document this car as best we can. I know we're replacing a lot of parts, but this is a special car and we are trying to keep as much of the integrity as we can. But realistically, same thing with this back end. I mean, I'm trying to save some time here. I know nothing on this back end, the wheel houses, the trunk gutters, the gas tank supports, the tail panel, everything is just put together wrong. It's just glued together, it's rusted out. There just really is no saving anything. That makes it worth it on this whole back section. We'll do a walk around later and you'll see what I mean. And really just cutting this off one whole section just saves a ton of time. There's no reason to just disassemble anything. We don't have to if everything's being replaced. Now you can see when I removed it, it pivoted right off the shackle mount. So that's going to be our reference point when we relocate our frame rails and then shoot our trunk center right down the middle. Working our way from the back forward now, we're going to remove the deck filler panel. Same thing. You could see the rust on this deck filler panel. Underneath it's all rusted. It needs to come off. Same thing with the rest of the skins on this body. It's sad that the car has been in this much bad shape where it spent most of its life. But realistically, you're at the mercy of the weather and the salt with these cars, and then the lack of preparation that they weren't made to last all these years. But we're going to save whatever we can that's realistic on the car without hurting the integrity or the structural or the safety of the car. And everything else is going to be a brand new car. When the owner gets it back, he's going to know that, I mean, realistically, this car should be better than factory. If you look on this outer wheelhouse, you'll see a hole in it. That's basically a window bracket I cut off that I know we have to save. They're on 70 and 71 model E-body cars. They did not have one on the driver's side because if you look right here on the outer wheelhouse, we actually had, it was an aftermarket one where they still left the screws in the car and they didn't even bother grinding down the well. So naturally, I'm sure they lost a bracket along the way. So that's something I'll get up with the owner because we need to hunt down one of those window brackets for the early model E-body cars. As far as removing these inner wheelhouses, this is an area I will take the plasma to a lot of times. Really on this car, the reason I didn't use the plasma really to cut around all these brackets and everything was just the sheer amount of undercoating just covering this car, and really to scrape it off and do all that to use the plasma, you're not saving that much time. So for me, it was easier to just take the cutoff wheel, cut around all these brackets, and then really just take the whole section out, and then we'll come back through with the spot weld remover, the drill bit, and then we'll go with the air chisel and kind of just work our way around these brackets very carefully. I also am going to remove both of the trunk supports. I am going to reinstall them, but if you see, they're just dangling back there, and there's really no reason to leave them on at this point. So this is an area of the car I think I'm going to take a lot of heat for. You see I'm removing the wire covers on the driver's side, and what we're going to end up doing on this car, we're going to cut out the whole entire floor. The owner was not originally wanting to touch this floor, and I see what he meant. It really is in decent shape. It does have little holes here or there all around it. The 4-speed transmission tunnel is all boogered up and just it's got random patches and it really is hacked up. But saying that, this is a factory torque box car. We need to put frame rails in this car. The factory torque boxes are also rotted in certain areas. They're going to need a lot of repairs. So between that, the dent in the floor, the broken center console brackets, everything else that needs to be done under the car with the frame rails and everything else, we're going to save a whole lot of time and effort to just remove these floors. We don't have to sandblast them, and I really think when we sandblast them, there's going to be a little bit more speckle, just pinholes everywhere in this floor pan. So what we're going to do, you'll see after this video, when we pull this floor pan out, the toe pan out, everything on the bottom of this car here, you're going to see how much more accessible the frame rail is going to get. Now you're also going to see the frame rails are completely welded from the factory to these torque boxes. To get the frame rails off, you really have to come in from the top down. If you don't do that, you really have to cut off the torque boxes from the bottom and work our way up. The problem is, they do make a AMD that we have right now makes a really nice aftermarket floor pan that almost matches this car. To the naked eye, you're never going to know. But the torque boxes, there isn't a company really reproducing these as perfect as they come from the factory. So you can tell if I put an aftermarket set of torque boxes on it. So that really is the reason that we're going to remove the floor. Obviously, there's other advantages of removing the floor and really just coming out with new metal. These floors, like I said, they needed some more work. It's hard to tell on the camera, but you'll see when we do a walk around later of the rusted out parts, you could see the rust underneath them. And then really, we know we can get in these rocker areas. Everything else is more accessible. And like I said, we'll be able to seal up in the torsion bar frame area. You'll see in a second when we open that area up really how much surface rust in there. Now it's not penetrating deep, but we still have to get in there. Also saying that, the front frame rail, we'll be able to pull the front frame rail off easier and get to that area and just be able to work that in from the top coming down, and I'll be able to use my jig mounts up front. Really, like I said, we had to waste this floor pan, and it sucks, but this is the part of the process that sometimes you just got to make a sacrifice here or there for the greater good of the car, and really the car just coming out better in the long run. So that's why we're doing it. You could see what I did going back to the process as I was talking. I basically went underneath the car, I traced out where the torsion bar support is, where the frame rails are, and I basically cut the lines out. I'm cutting out, like we did on the outer structure, the big section of the floorboards. Be wary that there's four, you see them, the 4 floor pan support braces. Don't get too excited because you'll cut right through them, but if you're easy and you just go right over them, no big deal. Now, once you get these main sections cut out, we'll come back in a little bit, you'll see with the air hammer, and we'll start peeling up the floor and the spot welds off all these frame rails and everything. I found removing the floor, it really is a whole lot easier this way, because if you leave everything in there, you're just fighting yourself on the process. So see, look at this coming back. This is exactly what I was saying. So now that the floor pan's all removed, I can stand in there comfortably. You can see right now the jig is working out perfect. We're hitting this car with the air hammer, we're pulling, we're prying on it, and just working this metal off, and you see it's not moving at all. But what I'm doing right now, the floor pan, like I said, is welded to those factory torque boxes where the frame rail drops up. So I started in that area and I started ripping all around the torque boxes at different areas, pulling that metal up. And you see right now I'm going from the back of the car and I'm working my way forward. Now with these rockers to floor pan area, you don't have to drill out these spot welds. What I like to do, since the rockers are such thick metal, you really don't have to worry about damaging them. I usually just work to the back side and the front side right around the spot weld, and a lot of times you'll just cut around the spot weld with the air chisel and it's going to stay there. So what you're going to do later down the road, you'll come back through with a belt sander, grinding wheel, flap disc, whatever you want to do, and just clean up that area that's left over and get it smooth. I'll do that before the sandblasting. You see right here too, I'm not even using the cutoff wheel. I'm using the air chisel that's sharpened on one side really steep, and I'm basically the other side's flat, and I'm just working my way. I can cut the rest of the sheet metal without hurting the frame rail section underneath for the torsion bar support. And you see I'm just working my way down one spot weld at a time. I work one side of the frame rail, go to the other, and I'm ripping it back with my hands at the same time. Some of these get to be a little bit harder than others, and then when I get a good roll too, you'll see I'll just cut it right off so I'm not fighting 3 feet of floor pan that I'm rolling on itself. So I get a manageable section, you see I cut it right off, and then once I do that, we roll it back over, and then the process keeps repeating till I get the manageable and the whole floor pan is completely removed. You can see right here, this was the surface rust I was talking about earlier underneath this. Everywhere on this car is pretty much slightly surface rusted. I talked about it earlier, and now we are going to actually use the plasma cutter. You can see one, I got plasma cutting glasses on, so they're really dark, almost like a welding glass. So when you're using the plasma cutter, remember about safety on those. What I'm doing though, I'm basically taking the plasma cutter where I can't get the cutoff wheel in, and I'm basically tracing around this rear cross member shock tower brace, and I'm taking the frame rail areas out in little sections. Right now we're trying to save this floor pan and everything. So what I'm doing, I'm kind of removing this off and saying that, look at these frame rails, that how rusted out they are. There's no way, even on a little bit of rust on the outside, they all get even worse on the inside. But removing them in small sections, I think, is the best way to do it. The whole idea initially was to leave this rear seat pan on the car, but realistically, thinking about it and kind of how we did the other side and still trying to get the front frame rails off, it became more of a hassle than it was worth. So I started to take the rear frame rails off the way I was initially thinking, keeping the rear seat pan on the car, and then I was a couple spot welds into removing the whole seat pan and realized how much easier this job would be. So we are going to go ahead and remove the rear seat pan. You did see I did remove the driver's side frame rail in with the seat pan in place. It was a little bit harder, but we change processes all the time. You just got to think about ahead where you're going to be. And like I said, just removing this seat pan is going to make the job so much easier down the road. What I am making sure though on this seat pan is completely usable. There's nothing wrong with it. So I'm going to remove it in one piece that we're able to reinstall it. And I'm going to let the owner decide if he wants to use a new rear seat pan or to put the original one back in with the slight repairs that it needs. So if you do remove these panels, it's completely possible. There's going to be a lot of panels you're going to have to remove sometimes to save. So the spot weld cutter is your friend on this one. I always cut all the spot welds, and with the air chisel, I'm extra easy on chiseling it up. You're basically just using it to just clean up your spot weld area to break the edges on it. Be very careful. If you have an area that's not coming up, you need to find the missing spot welds on it. So you see right here, I'm just removing the undercoat to just make sure I got some more spot welds, and you see I'm just easily prying it up and just working it. And you see a couple little twists. I find out where it's, catching, and right out comes the rear seat pan. And you could see once we remove this one part, again, a couple spot welds here or there, look how much more accessible this frame rail is, this torque box area, everything on the back of the car. That goes for blasting too, really getting in here and cleaning up the car, sealing it. Really, there's nothing at this point we can't get to and really make sure this car won't rust in the future. It also, you could see how I did the other frame rail cutting it out. This side took a whole lot less cutting, one cut on the front, one cut on the back. What we're going to do, we're going to just go ahead and clean this area back up. Now, this is the area that also made me want to take the rear seat pan out. You could see how rusted these rear braces are for the leaf springs, and I'm going to have to go through and rebuild them too. So realistically, working under a seat pan would have been, it's not impossible. It just makes the whole job a whole lot harder. I think this is the right thing to do, and we have multiple options. So we have finally concluded on the rear of the car. We pretty much removed everything, but so now we're going to turn our attention to the front of this car. This car, like I said earlier in the intro video, if you missed it, it really has different VIN numbers on the radiator support. So that's the number one reason we're cutting it out, minus the incorrectly installed inner fenders, radiator support, everything pointing to this. So what I'm going to do first, this frame rail is also rotted out. I showed that in the other video. What I'm going to end up doing, so we're going to basically, we need to save the shock tower bracket on here, the whole shock tower brace, and so I'm going to cut the inner fender out by itself with the plasma, and once that's removed, we're going to come back through and remove the rest of the parts. I was spot weld drilling against the firewall because we don't want to damage that. So I took my time on the firewall. The shock tower brace, we're going to have to come back through with a grinder. I'll show you in the future how we do that. But then the top area, we're just going to remove it from the bracket. Now, the shock tower bracket has the fender extension, all that can stay together because that's one piece, and actually that's going to help locate everything a little bit better and make it easier on us. I'm still going to do camber and caster adjustments on this car down the road, but like I said, this will give us a good reference to start off. And those areas, they do have some rust repair that needs to be done, but really they're completely salvageable. This frame rail right here had a giant hole in it and a crack all the way out. I couldn't figure out why it was rotted out until I looked inside, and you could see there was mouse nests everywhere in this frame rail. So that's what rotted it out. That goes the same with the passenger side rocker on this car. You'll see later when we start taking the passenger side rocker apart, there's just mouse nests everywhere in this thing. So that's another thing that really put a hurting on this car. You see right now I'm removing the shock tower brace with the front section of the frame rail. I unbolted it from the K-member. That's going to be our jig. We have an old K-member off another E-body car that just bolts right in place of this car exactly where it's supposed to go. So this side of the car is a little different. We're going to keep the frame rail on this side. After inspection, it needs a little area that's slightly got a little bit of rust pitting on it, but it's very minor, and I don't think justifies all the work on putting a whole frame rail in it. So we are just removing the inner fender on this part of the car. So again, I drilled the spot welds out on that bracket. We are replacing the bracket going from the inner fender to the firewall too. I am going to keep the shock tower fender bracket and that whole area going down to the frame rail. So you'll see we're just removing the weaker sheet metal up top, which is actually going to be a whole lot easier because taking these shock towers off the frame rails really is very cumbersome. Here we go, removing it. You see everything just came right out. We are going to go back through right now and clean up this area because you see we just did a rough cut around everything. So normally I would drill out the spot welds like you've seen done in the previous parts of the video. The number one thing that makes my job a whole lot harder is when someone else works on a car, and you could actually see it if you look real closely. They actually have MIG holes in all this area that they didn't even grind down. So the spot weld cutter can't actually get through it. So what I have to do, I have to basically take a grinding disc and remove most of the metal and get those areas really thin. You can do this with a belt sander too, but honestly, as thick as this metal is and as many spot welds as this is, it was easier to work the grinding wheel. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to work my air chisel with a sharpened tip, and you can see I'm kind of just working both sides around those MIG welds, leaving the center MIG area on the frame rail itself, and then I come back through with the grinding wheel again, and I just finish it off, and that's going to give us a really clean look when we're ready to go sandblast. Now, removing this radiator support, I don't know if you could see that radiator support that was installed was just glued on. I actually didn't even take anything to that radiator support, but one hit with basically the air chisel and the whole thing fell off. So you really got to watch out for the quality of work that some other people have done on these cars. I mean, it might have been done 40-50 years ago, when the car was in a wreck or something. So we're really backtracking quite a bit here, but we're still back to removing the front roof area. I just looking up, I totally forgot about it when I was working on the rest of the roof area. So no big deal. Well, again, sharpen air chisel. The good thing about this back brace is it's really solid. It's a thicker support material. So I don't even have to drill out the spot welds. I can just work my way right around with the air chisel. And you see, as I'm pulling up on it, digging under with the air chisel. It's just lifting it up and burning up those spot welds. Now, again, I'm going to have to come through just like everything else with a belt sander and just get the little areas. You have to get them before you put your new panels on, or they'll never lay flat. So that's important too, but really you can see the air hammer really does do a pretty good job on removing these parts. With this support brace, obviously this one is completely rusted out. Under the Challenger, you could see I cut out the back braces. They don't make these parts for a Challenger, so we're gonna have to hand fab and fix those areas after sandblast. But this front brace area, they do make it, and it is really rusted out. It's the same part as a Barracuda. What I did, I drilled out the spot welds on this because the metal underneath is a lot weaker, so the air chisel will break it up a little bit more. You could see even underneath this area how rusted the inner structure is behind the inner structure. So at what level do we just stop and just, get all the rust out? We cut everything out, there's going to be nothing there. But what we are going to do when we sandblast, we're going to sandblast down all the inner structure we can as best as we can, and then we're going to put basically we're going to spray all up in there with cavity wax, epoxy, whatever we have to get into to really seal up this car. It's a mirror image on this side. We're just same thing. We're taking off the same bracket, the same area on the down bracket. On this side was actually a little bit worse and rusted out. The reason why I want to leave everything off and I cut all the rust out is it's going to be easier, like I said earlier, to get in there with a sandblaster. It's structurally not hurting anything with it coming out. Again, we're not jumping on this car. We're not driving this car. The frame jig supporting it, so it's not the end of the world. You could see even when I removed this bracket, look at the inside of it and the bare metal that's exposed. Again, I said it time and time again, this whole bottom inner structure was bare metal, and that's why it rusted. Here's the other rocker I told you with the mice living in it. We're going to cut it off. Now, this is the driver's side. It looks a little better. It does have some rust on it also. We're going to patch that side up. With this rocker though, I'm doing it a little different. We are not cutting the whole entire rocker off. Some of this rocker was in really good shape. I want to get in there and blast all the mouse nest out and everything else. I want to seal up there really good. The rot in the back was so bad. We're going to cut the main part of the rocker off and basically spot weld it down the top and the bottom lips. You could see in the back, I'm going to cut under the window bracket bolts on the bottom, and then I'm cutting the front off before the fender bolts. We're going to basically hide a lot of this behind the front bottom door jamb area, and we're going to kind of blend it in really nice. I think it's going to come out really well. No one's going to notice, and it's not a super long run. But doing this, that's going to still keep the support in the car where the car's not bending, because it's now the inner rockers holding all the structure for that brace and the front door jamb area. If I remove the outer rocker from there, it really weakens up the car and we'd have to add more braces. So I think, again, looking at the end goal, no one's going to notice. This is a smart way of doing it, where we're still going to get a quality job when it's done, and it's going to be save the owner some money too, because I think it's going to be an easier install in the process. The last major part, we're going to go ahead and remove the outer skin and access the inner structure, is going to be the door panel. So you see the first step on this is we're going to remove the door hinges. You can rebuild these door hinges. Personally, for this car, he bought a new set of hinges. I've used them in the past. They seem to work great. We're going to not throw these hinges away just to make sure we have no issues with them. The first thing what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grind down with the belt sander. I'm not using the spot weld cutter because it's harder to get in that area, but I'm removing the outer door skin basically from this bracket. We're just weakening it, and same thing, we'll come through with the air hammer and we'll finish taking it out. Now, this is an AMD door skin, so this inner bracket I don't believe comes on the AMD door skin. I haven't actually pulled the door skin out of the box. If you get a Dynacorn door skin for these Challengers, it actually comes with that bracket pre-welded on there. So before you go disassembling the door or do what I did, leave the bracket on the door first. It's just going to make it easier, and then if you don't need it after you get your door skin, when it arrives, then you can go ahead and pull that bracket off. You see what I'm doing right now? I'm basically separating the door skin from the whole wraparound structure and what's sandwiching to the door frame. So I basically cut that area where the bracket is without cutting the bracket, of course, and I'm just taking a flap disc real easy and I'm just grinding down that whole door seam. I've done a whole YouTube video on installing Challenger door skins, both the Dynacorn and the AMD door skin on the same video, so check that out. But basically you're just exposing the panel, you're splitting the lip in general, and then all you're going to be able to do once you go all the way around, you'll actually see the lips opening up, and then you could just separate the door. You lift the door right off, it'll come apart pretty easy, and then you just come back through the other side with a chisel and just pop the spot welds off. Like I said, there's nothing too crazy removing this, but you can see this will allow us to sandblast and access the door panel. And you see the door skin on the inside had plenty of rust on it as well. Here's a walk around of all the rusted out parts that we took off this car. You could see there's a lot of damage on these parts. There's a lot of butchered up work here. There's parts just thrown upon other parts. There's rusted parts. There's parts that are damaged from previous sandblasting and the sand still stuck on here. There is undercoating covering a bunch of parts. There's brand new parts that never had primer on it. There's spray foam stuck in all kind of holes on this back trunk area section. There's just wrong VIN parts. There's the rusted out bottom of the floor pans I told you about. There's quarter panel skins on top of the original quarter panels with the stickers still on them. This car just is damaged. All right, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up now on the cutting down of this 70 Challenger. We did cut a lot. We still have a lot more cleanup to do, but let's go over some stuff. So basically, I think the only way to really build a car and know it's solid, done right, is really to get down to this point, to cut it all apart, look at it. You know, short of that, you're putting shiny paint on most of these cars that are rusting from the inside out. Perfect example is the door skin that we stripped off this car. We removed it. You could see the bare metal all running down the inner support structure. No matter the sandblasting or whatever we're gonna do, we still wouldn't get in here, even if the door skin was in perfect condition. Even down in this corner, we couldn't even see that. Now the door skin was removed because it had a couple dents on the high spots, and it was just easier to put the door skin on and now knowing we can take care of this. I'm gonna get with the owner on the other door skin. So far in the whole exterior parts of this car, the only part that's not gonna be new is gonna be the driver's side door skin currently. I'm gonna show him this door, let him make a decision on the other one if he wants to go ahead and rip it off and just treat it knowing that the rest of the car's aftermarket and that door wasn't original to this car anyway. So you could see this is why I like to strip them down. We're gonna get in here and sandblast it and clean it all up and make it right. What we have down here too, same thing, we have the rear seat pan. You could see same thing, where the frame rail was, all the bare metal and all the rust in between it. I think that I already talked to the owner, and I believe right now we are going to put a new rear seat pan in it. I did save it just in case he wanted to, but I think at this point, since the whole floor is brand new, again, we're going to just say front to rear, the whole frame, floor pan's brand new. We are going to reuse the shock tower. I have to sand, go through, grind up this whole area just like the other one. You could see we got rust up here we're going to have to patch, and same thing, I just got to grind those whole areas off and just really clean this up. It's also going to go through the sandblaster, and so we're going to get back to this. This is the other stuff that we're going to have to do in between this video and the next video. There's a lot more work still be done on this car with the cleanup I'll show you. So the frame jig. I don't believe this project is doable without a frame jig. You could see why. There's no support left in this car. You know, I don't think there's an argument against, the two arguments I always hear against a frame jig are it costs too much, which I'm telling you, these frame jigs, I had a guy that I helped out the other week and he built a really nice frame jig. I think he did it for less than $600. In the grand scheme of building these cars, if you're worried about $600 to start out, I think, you know, you might want to reconsider rebuilding one of these cars. And when you're done with it, you could just sell it to someone else so they can build a car. So you probably make all your money back. The second thing I hear most of the time is they take up too much room. You see the car on the frame jig, it takes up the same amount of room. What the frame jig allows though, and why I do it like this, it's more efficient, and I believe it gets the car back straight, because you saw on the last video, we leveled everything out on this frame jig. It's a solid platform. I can't really move this, and you see the parts that are moving are the top of the car. Everything's leveled out, and then what we're able to do, this is where our shackles are gonna go in the rear leaf spring. So they go right there, and then our frame rails, when we put them in here, will sandwich onto this shock tower brace, which again, I got some cleanup to do. Like I said, we gotta go through here and clean those up, and then the frame rails will sandwich against there and then come down and then run into, I'll show you up there, the torque boxes. So everything off the back of this car, I think we saved a lot of time by just cutting it off one time. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be more efficient. If we know everything back here shot, take it off one time without hurting the couple parts that we're gonna keep, that we know are good, and we move on from there. We save time, energy, everything else. So looking at this car, you could see the roof structure, everything. On the other side over here, you can see it was all rotten. I figured that was going to happen. Again, it's bare metal on these cars. We removed, like I said, the whole floor pans, and the reason we mostly removed the floor pans because these torque boxes are so rusted out. And then with this floor pan, the frame rail comes in here and then runs along right here. So to have a floor pan in here, get the welds and everything else, it was easier to finish removing these spot welds. And then really, even with all this, to clean up these floor pans, we gotta grind off all the floor pans because they weld these torque boxes separate. And this is what really is on these high performance, the RTs, the Cudas with the big blocks and the Hemi cars. So really, we're trying to preserve the factory torque boxes, both front and rear. So saying that, the good thing is we have an empty slate that we really can work on. We're going to treat in all the frame rails that are left, all the torsion bar supports, everything, and we're really going to, like I said, build this car right from, you know, how the factory would do it as best as possible. The inner structure, there is a little bit of play in it, but as long as we're not climbing on it, it's holding its structure and everything's pretty sound. The whole idea is you need to pre-plan what you're doing. So if you go back and you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch the first video. It was strategically put where we place our jig mounts, that I knew what we were saving and what we weren't. We have them on a torsion bar support, and what that does is, like I said, we can't move the whole bottom of the car. That's the key, where we cut everything off at once. I know there's a lot of people out there doing this, and you can too. You cut one piece out, replace it, and then come back in, cut another piece out, replace it, but it's just not efficient. If we're trying to run a sandblaster and everything, we want to blast this car one time. I want to seal it up and prime it one time. I want to go through, like I said, now that we're done with the cutting steps, we're going to go through and remove each one of these little extra divots and the pieces that we ripped off real fast, one at a time, starting from the front to rear. It just makes it efficient when you have the tools out and you get in that motion. So looking at the front, we did save the upper cowl panel and the firewall. Now the firewall, in between the areas, you could see it where the rust builds up. That's where they don't put any protection. So being that this is this kind of called a special car, and we don't need to do all that we're gonna make a small patch in this area. This area down here is gonna be patched some more. We're gonna see how it blasts out too. Blasting this car, you know, there's a heavy coat of paint up here. We might see some more pinholes. So that's gonna be the final determination. You see right here, same thing. We got our points for our frame rail. When we put our new frame rail in, we should be able to just slide it in here, drop it down. I'm gonna show you on the next couple build videos how I go about, same thing, in time lapse, just assembling one of these cars. We're not gonna stop. I'm gonna just show you, I like to do this part first, this part second, and we build on from here. This area up here too, we left the shock tower and the fender support brace. It just, the inner fender goes around it. We'll have to do some repair, and this frame rail looked good. We know now that this frame rail was really just rotten because there was mice living in it. So that gives us a good sign on what happened with that. So looking at it, the car looks bad. I mean, there's not that much left of it, but I think, honestly, we're gonna build it right. We're waiting on 2 more parts for the car. I still have a lot of work, like I said, in the prepping of it. We have to sandblast this car, so stay tuned in the next coming videos. By the next video, I should have everything kind of cleaned up in general, and we'll start the sandblasting and epoxy process. Once we sandblast this car, this is the perfect car for a candidate for a sandblast because sand can't get stuck anywhere. So once we sandblast the car, you should never be able to tell that this was an orange car. We'll put it in epoxy, seal it up, and then we'll start the rebuild process. So stay tuned. Hopefully you like this video. Hopefully it kind of shows the importance of frame jigs. I mean, even on the front end with the K-member, we're gonna be able to just locate the bolts right in this thing, screw it down, we're gonna get the right heights. All these are evened out to the bottom of the frame rail. So it just makes your build in almost better than factory level in the sense that, you know, the spring heights, everything is driving straight, it's squared, it's level up and down, and you have a flat surface that you can level to measure off of, especially on this garage floor that's not level. So that's my idea on how to build these cars. Again, it might not be the only way. What we try to do here, I try to build as perfect cars as we can with as little rust on them as the owners will allow, and we try to build them, like I said, better than factory, and that'll last a lifetime. And I really think this process so far, and we're trying to be efficient with it, is the best way to do it. We might change again in the future. You know, we find different tips and tricks, but in general, this is how we like to do our builds. And actually, the full builds like this, it's actually easier in the sense that, like I said, we could just remove everything because it's, you know, we don't have to cut each individual part. And then when we build it, you're building new metal on top of new metal, and it just welds better, and the product usually turns out better. So stay tuned. Let's see how this car turns out. I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. Be on the lookout for another video of this and the other projects we have going on. If you haven't liked our video yet, please do so. It really helps us out. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, also please do it. We really appreciate it. So I'll see you on the next one.